The Mariners are now 10 games up in the AL West, and Mariners broadcaster Gary Hill Jr. is just as surprised as everyone else.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Wednesday, June 19th, 2024. This is Tony Gonzalez for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's show, Colby and I are joined by Mariners broadcaster and longtime friend of the show, Gary Hill Jr., to talk about your first place Seattle Mariners. But before we get into that, shout out to our title sponsor today, Prize Picks. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedonmlb and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's all lowercase for a first deposit match up to $100. And if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. The link is in the description and you can sign up for a free 7-day trial. All right, let's talk to Gary. Taking some time out before he hits the airwaves tonight for Game 2 between the M's and the Guardians, Mariners radio broadcaster Gary Hill Jr. joins us from Progressive Field in Cleveland, Ohio. Gary, pleasure as always having you on. How's it going at the ballpark?
It's great. It's always fun to be in Cleveland, and it's fun to talk to you guys again. It's been a little while.
You got in on Monday. Did you get to do anything with the off day in Cleveland? I know Simsy went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
So, yes, he did. Aaron and I chose to spend Father's Day at home Sunday night, so we flew on our own on Monday. So we spent our off day flying. But, you know, Cleveland is underrated in terms of little fun things to do. I like to get out and take runs during the day. So, like, League Park, the old Cleveland ballpark, and the Negro League Park here until the 40s. The site is still there. They have a great museum. They've restored it. That's a cool place to go. If you're a fan of the Christmas Story movie, A Christmas Story, like the house is here, you can check that out. There's all kinds of little interesting things around the city that's interesting. Funny enough, I've never been to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which I feel guilty about. I have to make that happen at some point because I heard it's great. So I'll have to do that.
This last night, hilarious story came out after the game. So when Luke Raley hit his home run, there was a fan that should have caught the ball, dropped the ball onto the field. Turns out that's Luke Raley's uncle. I mean, what are the odds of that?
I don't know, man. I don't know what the odds are. That is so wild. It's funny because the night before I was just saw a video of when Bobby Witt Jr. hit the foul ball to his dad when they were in the suite. And I was marveling, like, what are the odds of that happening? And then this happened last night, which is even more wild because it was a home run. I don't know what to say about that. I think it's the greatest thing ever and the most ridiculous thing that's ever happened. The only thing better would have been had he caught the ball.
Yeah.
Although maybe dropping it was better. I don't know.
Did he get a ball? Did he get the ball? Something to...
No, because the left fielder wasn't sure, and he immediately threw the ball back into the infield. Because he saw the ball come back, and I don't know if he thought maybe it hit the top of the wall or something like that. So he just threw it in instead of just looping it back to left field. So I would like to think Luke could get him a ball, though.
Yeah, I wonder what's stranger though, because we saw Raley hit the home run to his uncle, but we also saw a fan catch 2 foul balls on back-to-back pitches, the same fan.
Right. Yeah.
This year. So like which one is more impressive, more weird? Like that's I mean it's been crazy.
I think the 2 foul balls, I think for me, you know, I grew up in Tacoma, and there was always this legend that was told at Cheney Stadium when they were the Tacoma Tigers. And I remember this story because it's so wild. Like Gary Peters was batting and hit a foul ball and hit it to a woman in the stands. And it hits this woman in the stands. And then she decides to change seats because she just got hit with the ball. She changed seats. Gary Peters later in the game hit a foul ball right to her again in the stands and hit her in the stands. So, you know, it's legend. I don't know if it's true, but I think stories like that are the greatest because the odds are so long that could actually happen.
So how about Luke Raley in general? I mean, this guy has quickly become part of like the heart and soul of the team, right? Like the energy he brings, like, you know, obviously the bunt that he had against Chicago, Cal's talked about how he's quickly become one of his closest friends on the team. Like, he's just, Colby and I talk a lot about Scott's service and developing kind of the for lack of a better term, the Mariner way. And it feels like Luke Raley kind of perfectly fits in that mold, right?
Yeah, and I feel like the fan base is attached to him really quickly. And because, man, he just plays with that blue collar attitude, right? He's just running around, thundering all over the base pass, running hard. That was a great catch last night too, along with the
Yeah.
home run. But he's been really productive. He's played all over the place. He has been everything I was hoping he would be coming over. And you're right. He just feels like a Mariner. He feels like a great fit for everything, clubhouse, on the field, the whole thing. And I think you're right to point that out, and how pivotal he's been for the Mariners, especially production wise.
Colby, you got anything for Gary?
Yeah, curious. Last night we saw Munoz come in for the 5-out save. First time we've seen him do that in a while, as he's dealing with the back issue. Could you make an argument that Munoz might be the most, maybe not the most valuable, but maybe the most important Mariner this year when you look at just the bullpen in general and how it's been, it's been hurt most of the year, and Munoz has just kind of been this steady rock, and he's pitching through this back issue. Like, how good has Andres Munoz been? Like, what's it like to watch him as often as you get to?
He's amazing. And I think you make a great point, because coming into this season, we all know this was going to be a big four, right? And I include Spire into that mix too. And unfortunately, we haven't seen Brash, we haven't seen Santos, and Spire's been hurt for most of the year. So it's been on Munoz to carry the load in the back innings. And he has been magnificent. And as you point out, he hasn't been 100% for all this season. But outside of the aftermath of the collision at home in Oakland, he's taken the ball every time they've needed him. And he's taken the ball now 5 times to get multi-inning saves, which is pretty incredible. He has been lights out. He has been, along with Clase and Miller, I mean, those are the 3 best relievers in baseball, in my opinion. And what he has done to transition himself, as well as, he was a 4-seam fireballer and slider guy. Now he still has that. His slider's still great, still has the 4-seam. But the addition of the 2-seam too has been a great weapon for him. It's still upper 90s. It's got a ton of movement, and it makes it nearly impossible right now to hit off the guy. And I don't think you can say enough about what he's done. And if you are having the conversation about who's most valuable, yeah, you can make that case. To me, he's a clear-cut all-star, and probably the most clear-cut all-star of any Mariner on the team. I don't think you can heap enough praise on Munoz and what he's done.
He's been fantastic this year. And again, like you said, pretty much every time they've called upon him, he's come through. And they started asking a lot of him right from the jump, right? He had the 4-out save against the Red Sox, second game of the year. I mean, that's pretty remarkable to ask your reliever to do that in game 2 of 162, and he comes through, and now he's done that 5 times this year. It's insane.
And I love a guy that's willing to do it. You
Yeah.
know? I mean, we've heard stories about guys around the league that we don't have to name that have not been interested in taking the ball, and other than give me a clean inning in the 9th inning and try and get 3 outs. And that is not Munoz, man. He'll take the ball whenever you ask, and he loves being there with the game on the line, which is super fun, because I know Mariners fans love when he's out there with the game on the line. So it works out pretty well.
I'm not sure how many people are going to be listening to this before the game, but I do want to ask about Brian Wu, since he's going tonight. It's been a few times now. He's had something to deal with, arm fatigue, what have you, since coming back. Just recently got scratched from his start last Thursday. In a way, also kind of helped the Mariners set up their rotation perfectly for that Rangers series. But what's kind of the general vibe, the feel right now in the clubhouse from Scott's service on Wu, both for tonight and then long term?
Seems like he's all go tonight, and we'll see the expectation is we'll see the same guy that we've seen, who's been utterly dominant and ridiculously efficient. It's been amazing. Not only have we seen him throw up zeros seemingly every start, but the way he's done it and the minimum pitches he's needed to do it has been pretty spectacular. I marvel at what he's done since stepping onto the field this year. It's pretty absurd. and just the fastball magician that he is. Two seam going one way, four seam going the other. Guys just can't hit it. They just can't pick it up. They can't see it. And he's not getting hit hard at all. It's been amazing. And that's the key, like moving forward, is you got to keep him healthy. And the Mariners know that. They know his history. They're not going to push it if he feels anything because they want him on the mound. They want him pitching. So they're going to be careful with him. And I give the Mariners a lot of credit. They've invested a lot into the health side. And I think, you're never going to keep everyone healthy. There's going to be injuries in baseball. That's an obvious statement. But the Mariners invest a lot of time and effort into doing everything they can to keep guys healthy. They monitor everything that goes on. So that's just going to be constant with Wu. It's going to be a constant process throughout the season.
More from our conversation with Gary Hill Jr. in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by eBay Motors and Prize Picks. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into an MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Again, that is ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. With Prize Picks, you could turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer by making a Prize Picks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You just need to pick more or less on 2 to 6 players' stat projections, and you're locked in. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become a part of the Prize Picks community today. Download the app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. You're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. We're here with Mariners broadcaster Gary Hill Jr. Gary, on yesterday's episode, Colby and I kind of dove into how the Mariners are in the position they are right now. Now they're 10 games up in the AL West, which is insane to say out loud right now here on June 19th, given everything that's happened, given what the expectations were heading into the season, more so for Texas and Houston specifically. And I know quite a bit of this can be chalked up to how bad Texas and Houston have been, but you look at this Mariners ball club, the offense has struggled mightily for most of the year. The rotation has obviously been lights out and at times historic, but it hasn't been a consistent dominance from game one to now. Like there's been a couple of hiccups a couple times through the rotation as well. And then we just talked about the injuries in the bullpen and that it's basically Andres Munoz carrying the load there late in games. And then you got a bunch of guys who are really solid, like Trent Thornton and Taylor Saucedo and Austin Voth, but they're kind of pitching out of what the Mariners would prefer their role to be. So I want to ask you, how are the Mariners here in this spot? Do you have any idea of how we've gotten to this point?
I was thinking about this the other day. It's funny coming into this Cleveland series, and I found myself having a discussion about buys in the first round of the postseason because as we all know, it's not the top 3 records in the American League. It's the top 3 division winners. And going into the series against Cleveland, here we are heading towards the end of June, and we're having a discussion about the second buy in the postseason, which is pretty wild to think about. And I was thinking about, connected to that, about how many things have not gone to plan for the Mariners this year. All the things you just pointed out. And including the rotation, because there have been some bumps in the road, especially early in the season, but especially with the injuries to the bullpen and the offense through the course of the year. But to me, that is what I actually find the most encouraging, because I feel like they haven't played their best baseball this season. I still think they're going to get better offensively. I think the rotation can carry this forward for a long time. I mean, maybe not as dominant as this recent stretch has been, or as dominant they've been at home in particular, but I think this is the kind of talent in the rotation that they can rip off a month where every guy's essentially going 6 innings, which is what we've seen. But they can get healthy in the bullpen. They can add to the bullpen. They can add to the offense. They can get better offensively from within. You know, JP can get closer to what he was last year. I think it's a big ask to ask him to do what he did last year. That could be a career year. We don't know. Julio could go on a power surge. We've seen Garver be better. There are so many areas internally where I think the Mariners can and will get better offensively. And there's areas where I think they'll get better in the bullpen, and Santos being one of those, and maybe Logan Evans is another one of those guys, and who knows who else. But I see so many areas of improvement, which is such a funny thing to say for a team that's up 10 games and feeling great about where they are. And right now playing great baseball. I was thinking about the Texas series, and it felt like, and maybe it's just recency bias, but it felt like their most complete series of the season for me.
Yeah.
Because the offense I thought was really good in all three. The bullpen outside of one, the Saturday game. And then the rotation, of course, was utterly dominant. But it was just a complete series, and so far so good in Cleveland.
So 10 games up in the division. June 19th.
Which we all predicted on this day.
Right, right. Again, I just kind of have to say it out loud just to, I don't know, convince myself that it's real.
I mean, it is something when you get to double digits, right? It just feels different.
So, I mean, yeah, this is kind of uncharted waters for all of us. I mean, this is their largest division lead since the end of 2001. It's the biggest division lead in all of baseball right now. I mean, how does that feel?
It feels wonderful. I love it. I hope it continues the rest of the year because I really enjoy it. And I enjoy watching the Rangers lose games from afar and the Astros lose games from afar. Like, the whole thing is great. So I want it to continue. It is, it's funny because it is 10 games, which is a big lead. Yet, the Astros have just been there for so many years. Like, I can't, I'm still watching every day to see how they're doing, and it's not going well. Yet I don't, how it is. I'm sure you feel the same way, right?
The exact same way.
They're not gone until they're gone. And
no, I was intently watching that White Sox Astros game last night after the Mariners game ended. I was watching that. I had the dual screen up on MLB TV with the Rangers game on one side, the Astros game on the other. I don't care that last night was June 18th and I'm scoreboard watching. Technically, I don't care. This is uncharted waters, like I said. I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying every single moment of this. And like you said, it's always fun to watch the Rangers and Astros lose.
Yes. I mean, we can all agree on that, especially Houston. I think everyone can agree on that. So, and they, both of them, they've struggled, obviously, but you could see how the struggles could continue. Like, both those teams have some real issues that they're dealing with. And that's something I give the Mariners credit for, because it has not been smooth sailing. They've had their issues, but hey, they've won games along the way, which is, sometimes, Aaron and I talk about this all the time, kind of the lessons learned from the last few years. And one of the differences to me this year from the last few years is they didn't bury themselves. They didn't have one of those stretches where, I don't know, they went 6-16 or 6-20 or whatever, a really bad month, which, and it felt like the last 3 years there, it was always uphill. They were chasing 8 games or 7 games or 6 games. And that was the difference this year. They haven't always played great, but they found a way. Hey, they had a 500 stretch instead of a stretch where they just won 3 games. And to me, that's in baseball, that's it sometimes, because you're not always going to play great.
Yeah, Colby and I talked about that yesterday. Like, this team has been able to continuously stop the bleeding.
Yes.
Right? They haven't gotten swept yet. Right? And even in some pretty crappy moments of the season, right? Like, the Milwaukee-Toronto road trip, right?
Yeah.
They're able to salvage a game there in Toronto before they go back home. Washington, on that gauntlet of a road trip, they lost those first 2 games. They end up blowing that lead in Washington, but they still win that 3rd game. Kansas City last weekend, right? They're able to salvage a game there. Like, the constant ability to stop the bleeding. I mean, their longest losing streak is 4 games. Their longest winning streak is also 4 games, but they again, it's just the ability to just kind of scrap and claw and make sure this thing doesn't snowball. I think that's a big reason that they're in the position that they're in right now.
I'm glad you brought up the Toronto series too, because it is such a reminder of just the marathon nature of this thing. Because, man, fast forward to where we are now and where the Mariners are and where the Blue Jays are, and they are completely different places than they were when those two met early this season in Toronto.
Yeah. Colby, you got anything for Gary?
Yeah, we're coming up on about the halfway point on the season, which is also crazy to say. And there's a lot of, typically at the halfway point, we take stock. We do things like who's the MVP, who's the Cy Young of this team, blah, 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 and all that stuff. But I think the most interesting one might be who's the unsung hero of this team. There are 4 teams in Major League Baseball who have more wins than the Seattle Mariners right now. And as we've said, and as you've said, like, things have not gone swimmingly for the Mariners. They've had a lot of issues that they've had to deal with, but you start thinking of unsung hero. You start thinking about Hancock in the first month. You think about Dylan Moore in the road trip and Josh Rojas stepping up when, nobody else was really hitting. And you think about Raley and Stanek and Voth and Thornton. Like, who do you think the unsung hero of this team is? If you had to pick one guy.
Yeah, this is a great question, because I think there are more candidates for this than if you talk about like an MVP in the first half. And that's a compliment to the depth, because they've had a lot of guys. Even Locklear in a brief time has made an impact on things. For me, though, I immediately think about Josh Rojas and what he's done for the Mariners, because he has played way over my expectations coming into the season. He's been really good defensively too at third base. He's filled the hole there. Offensively, for a while, he was like the guy. When the rest of the lineup was really struggling, he was producing, and for like a month long. And he's gotten back to being, he's batting second in the order, right? He's spraying the ball around. He's playing good defense. We've seen him move around. He was in left for a little while, a couple of times, and second, of course, but he's really anchored third base and made that a spot that's his, and a dependable spot too for the Mariners, which is great to see. So for me, especially when I think about unsung, I think about my expectations. It's Rojas for me, who's just blowing them away.
Conversation continues with Gary Hill Jr. in just a moment, but first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Policygenius and Tax Network USA. Choosing the right life insurance policy is a very important and overwhelming decision, and you want to be able to feel fully confident making that decision. Now you can with Policygenius, which is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. With Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options even offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Plus, your life insurance policy through your work may not offer enough protection for your family's needs. Even worse, it may not come with you if you leave your job. Policygenius gives you unbiased advice from a licensed expert support team, and there are thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot from customers who found the best fit for their needs through Policygenius. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com/lockedonmlb or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockedonmlb. Here on Locked On Mariners, we pride ourselves on getting you the latest news for your team, whether it's the offseason, the draft, spring training, or the playoffs. It's year-round. You know what else is year-round? Collection season. Just because tax season is over doesn't mean the IRS will stop coming after you for unfiled taxes. The IRS can garnish your wages, levy your bank accounts, and even seize your property. Don't let the IRS target you. Let the licensed professionals and tax experts at Tax Network USA go to bat for you. With over 14 years of experience and an A+ rating by the Better Business Bureau, Tax Network USA has saved their clients over $1 billion in tax debt. Whether you owe taxes, have complicated matters that require tax planning, or finally hit that parlay this season and need help correctly filing, call 1-800-549-1000. That's 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/locked-on. See the link in this episode description. You're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. We're here with Mariners broadcaster Gary Hill Jr. Again, this team is in a position that we have rarely seen them in before, and the trade deadline is coming up here in a few weeks' time, and obviously, we have no idea who's going to be buying and selling, specifically on the National League side of things, with all those teams that are basically just 2 games within one another. I mean, that's just nuts. But we know Jerry and Justin are going to do what they do best, right? So, but again, we haven't seen them in this particular situation. So what are your expectations for the deadline?
First of all, the fact the Nationals were holding down the 3rd wild card spot going into yesterday I think tells you all you need to know about the National League. And I think that's actually a big part of the question here is how many teams are going to fall out of this thing and actually be sellers? Because I think that's pretty critical. There's 4 teams now that we know are out of this thing, and we know, I mean, we've all heard the names and talked about the names involved, Robert, everyone else. I think that's going to go a long way in deciding what this deadline looks like. I mean, needless to say, the more that's available, the more chance you have, because obviously the Mariners aren't the only team that's going to be looking for a bat or looking for a bullpen arm or whatever else they want to get. So to me, that's pretty critical. The deadline is so hard for me to talk about because it's the one area I feel like I'm just kind of in the dark more than anything else, because I don't know what the White Sox are going to ask for. Some guys you don't even know if are actually going to be traded.
Right.
There are so many unknowns for me when it comes to the deadline, because if you listed, 15 guys and said, would they help the Mariners? I'd be like, probably yes, 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 yes. You could go down the list and be happy with a bunch of different guys. I mean, that's the positive. I think there's more than one way to make this a successful deadline. The trick is always, okay, what's the asking price? And this is an important deadline, obviously. But Jerry and Justin also have a job on the other side, because you can't give up everything. I mean, I think about it in terms of what the Mariners are doing right now. And what the Mariners have done a really good job of, a great job of, is they've had teams ask for Kirby when he was coming up. They had teams ask for Gilbert. They had teams ask for Julio a lot. And they held on to all 3, and all 3 are centerpieces of what the Mariners are doing right now and critical to what the Mariners are doing right now. And it would be really painful to watch them in other uniforms doing what they're doing. And that's the trick of the deadline, right? You're always going to have to give something up to get something good. Like, that's a thing. Like, they give up a lot to get Castillo. It hasn't worked out for the Reds yet, but it still could. Those are good players. So I'm not saying you can't give up good players. But if you have guys that you think are going to be superstars, like, you don't want them to go. And that's the trick. That is easier said than done, and why I enjoy not having to make that call, because it's hard.
I mean, right. It's one thing to, go into the deadline when, you're kind of a fringe contender and these guys are asking for your best prospects. And you say, no, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's kind of a different animal when you're 10 games up in the division and you're chasing a 1st round bye and you're chasing a home playoff series and all that stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how they kind of walk that line. I think Ty and I have said this a lot, because obviously people want to talk trades. It's you got to walk that line between aggression and reckless. I think you want to be aggressive at this deadline, but you don't want to just be throwing guys around like, whatever, it doesn't matter. So it'll be interesting to see how Jerry and Justin walk that line, because I do think they need to make a Castillo-like trade, preferably on the offensive side, but whatever. Get good players. I'm happy. So it'll be fun to see how they kind of navigate that, but this is kind of uncharted territory for for, the front office, because they've never been in like this position before. It's always been, they've been chasing, like you said, they've been chasing, and now they are the ones getting chased. And so it'll be interesting to see how they react and how aggressive they're willing to be.
It's kind of a weird spot to be in, because it's like, when you're a division leader and when you have as many kind of flaws as this Mariners team has shown here over the first couple months, it's like, we need to get better by any means necessary, but also you can't really go into it with that mindset either, because by any means necessary can lead to, like you were saying, Colby, recklessness.
You got to be willing to walk away.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if, let's just use Robert as to pick it out of a hat, if the White Sox came to you and said, yeah, we want your top 6 prospects, it's like, well, that's not happening.
Right.
And that's to your point. Like, you can't be reckless. And for teams, I think it is helpful to look at it from the other perspective sometimes, because I feel like during trade talks, the conversation is usually from whatever team you follow's perspective. But think about it from the White Sox perspective. If they do end up trading Robert, I mean, this is going to kickstart the rebuild. They're going to want to get as much as possible if they're going to do it. That is their big chip, right? And so they need to hit, and they want to hit big. So you think about it from the other team's perspective. It's not just Robert. You could list a bunch of guys along those lines, but that's why this is so tricky. We get used to it because the Mariners actually make a lot of trades, as we know, make more trades than most teams, but trading often is not easy. It's not easy to match up.
No.
Yeah. The interesting thing that the thing that I'm interested to see, rather, kind of like you mentioned, is just, looking at it from the other side, is Toronto with Vlad Jr. and Bo Bichette, because those guys have been, very much in the rumor mill here, especially when it comes to the Mariners. And it's like, they built that entire era of baseball in Toronto around those two guys. Like, are they actually going to wave the white flag? What does that mean for, Ross Atkins and those guys' jobs in general? I have no idea what they're going to do, but that's going to be fascinating.
I've been thinking about the Blue Jays a lot recently, given where the Mariners are right now, because I felt like you go back a couple of years ago and the Mariners and Blue Jays were right there. And it looked like, hey, we could see these teams match up in the playoffs a few different times in the next few years. And what this really points out to me, and I think we know this, but the Mariners have done such a great job internally producing their own guys. I mean, we see it on the field every day. It's a golden era of the Mariners system right now, with the Kirbys and the Gilberts and Cal and Julio and everyone else. And then the next wave that you're hoping that have all been really well regarded. And then you put that side by side with a team like Toronto, and that's where they have struggled. Like, they've gone out and they spent a lot. They have a big payroll, which is great, but they haven't been able to produce those after Vlad and Bo Bichette. They haven't been able to produce those same kind of guys. And now here they are staring at, it's a heartbreaking decision if you trade Vlad at the deadline and what that signals to your fans, or Bichette at the deadline. So I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about Toronto and the decision that they have coming, and kind of how they got to this point and how they were even with the Mariners and where the Mariners are. I just think it's super interesting to compare and contrast the two teams right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they were pretty much on similar timelines. I think that the Mariners were probably a year, maybe a year and a half behind them for a little while there. But then, 2021 kind of changed everything, right? That team had no business winning 90 games, and then it won 90 games. And again, that turned the window into like, probably, 2023, 2024 is when this thing is really going to kick into high gear, into 2022. Like, we're going to start going for this thing now. And sure enough, we know what happened in 2022, but that 2021 ball club, I think, especially if, this Mariners team, or, a Mariners team in the near future here, gets this thing done, actually wins a division, competes for a championship, they were going to look back on that 2021 team and, point to that as like, that was the moment right there.
Yeah, I think there's some similar elements too from this team to that team. I feel like this team is better and this team is more talented than that team, but there's some similar elements, I think, between this year's team and that team.
Colby, do you have anything before we get out of here?
No, I think we've covered pretty much everything. It's just so much fun to talk about a team that has a 10-game lead.
Yeah,
like,
right.
we literally do spend hours and hours talking about it, and I still, at the end I'm like, maybe we should talk about that some more. That's a lot of fun. So, hopefully the Mariners can secure their series win tonight. It'll be interesting to see Brian. I have this feeling that because Cleveland doesn't strike out, they put the ball in play. Like even last night, it was such a grind to get through that game that I'm really interested to see what Brian Wu does, because we know Cleveland will foul off a bunch of pitches. We know that Brian Wu's whole shtick is, 4-seam, 2-seam. I'm going to throw it wherever I want. You're not going to hit it. And it'll be interesting to see how those kind of clashing styles really work against each other, because Seattle and Cleveland, they are not built the same, but they are kind of a really good matchup to watch. They both pitch pretty well. One's more power, one's more contact, but they both have stars. It's going to be a fun next couple days, I think.
There's been good games between these two teams the last few years. And to your point, like for whatever reason, they really match up really well. And they're similar in how they go about it, especially on the pitching side, which is always fascinating. Although, I don't know, looking at Cleveland, big picture, because, back to the bye conversation, to me, Minnesota is still the team that's lurking. Because the issue I have with the Guardians, I'm not alone on this, is they do not get much from their rotation. And their bullpen's been great, but I just wonder during the course of the season, are they going to be able to throw that amount of innings and still be that effective? It's really too bad that they lost Bieber, lost their guy, their ace, in a year like this where he would make a massive difference. But that's something, speaking of deadlines, that's something that Cleveland, I think, is going to have to address, because it doesn't seem sustainable to me that they can stay this effective. Yeah. And I think they're 27th in starter innings pitched, which is rare to see for a good team.
Stephen Vogt used his bullpen so much last night. I'm going to be interested to see how they deploy those guys over the next couple of days and who's available, who's not.
Yeah, they kind of went for it last night, I thought. They really
he really thought they could win that game.
Yeah, he managed it that way. Like he blew through everybody. So
yeah, I was surprised to see McKenzie. I mean, obviously McKenzie wasn't good yesterday, but I was surprised that he gave him that quick of a hook.
That was fast.
In a June 18th game.
Right.
Seems like one of those games where you just have to have your starter wear it a little bit.
A little bit. I mean, you got to do that from time to time, unfortunately.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, Vogt clearly from the Scott Service School, where it's like winning that first game of the series is the most important game you can win. He tried to win it. We'll see if it has any ramifications for the next two. But yeah, that was really, he wore out a small path between the dugout and the pitcher's mound yesterday. It was something else. Yeah.
There was a very clear reason why that was the longest game of the season for the Mariners.
It was weird to get over 3 hours. That never happened. So.
Right. That used to be commonplace. Now it's just what
every day.
All right, Gary. Well, I thank you so much again for hopping on it. Again, it's always a pleasure chatting with you, talking ball with you. Would love to do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Anytime. It's always good to talk to you guys. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Gary.
And that's going to do it for our show. But before we get out of here, a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Titan Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at @LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Titan Gonzalez. And Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.